Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is Gearbox's latest take on their Borderlands formula, and when it dropped last month, it was pretty decently received by fans and critics alike. However, now with the release of its latest DLC, players are taking to Reddit and social media to complain about one thing in particular. In short, the $10 dungeon run called Coiled Captors is just too short and doesn't have a lot to offer, especially when compared to games like Borderlands 3, which had free updates that gave players considerably more to do. If you're not familiar with Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, the game basically takes the tone and mechanics from Gearbox's popular Borderlands games and combines it with high fantasy tabletop role-playing. There are still guns, for example, but sometimes they look like crossbows, or instead of grenades, you cast spells, etc. Things seem to be going well with Wonderlands until about a week ago, when a launch trailer for the first DLC dropped, and fans were really underwhelmed, as it only seemed to include a small dungeon and a handful of new loot. Some held on to hope that there was more, but they were quickly let down when Coiled Captors launched last Thursday. Popular Borderlands streamer Killer6 tweeted their impressions saying, "The DLC is way too short, the new gear is underwhelming, the boss is too easy, and altogether Tiny Tina's first DLC is a long shot away from meeting the high bar of expectations Gearbox has built up with Borderlands over the years." A number of criticisms began flooding the game's subreddit, and eventually one post was made to give users a singular place to vent called DLC1 Coiled Captors Feedback Thread. That's not uncommon behavior on Reddit, especially from mods, but the top post sums it up pretty well, which reads, "This thread is already longer than the DLC." Part of the issue here is a misalignment of expectations, where past Borderland games have offered very substantial DLC expansions that included multiple areas to explore, new enemies, new loot, and significant narrative content and quest lines. To make matters worse, Coiled Captors is only the first part of a 4-part season pass. Each part is $10 individually, but you can buy the whole season for $30. Another commenter on Reddit, Dr. Feeble, contextualized their issues saying, "Coiled Captors includes 5-ish rooms with reused assets, no new enemies, and the barest story possible. Each Borderlands 2 Headhunter DLC featured a unique area, sometimes unique enemies, always a unique boss, and at least a short voice-acted story. Coiled Captors is $10. Each Headhunter DLC is $3. This is obviously a problem." There are hundreds of other comments in the Coiled Captors feedback thread echoing similar sentiments, commiserating, and even issuing warnings to other players not to buy the season pass just in case the other 3 parts are more of the same. To Gearbox's credit, they weren't necessarily deceitful with the marketing or messaging around the season pass content, specifically saying in a blog post each of the 4 parts would feature a single dungeon, but given Gearbox's history with DLC, it's easy to see how players were quickly underwhelmed. So I certainly think that players were expecting, the first DLC pack or each of these parts to have a dungeon that's kind of substantially bigger, but also I think it's important to note the quickness at which this first DLC drop came for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. Again, the game's only been out for nearly a month, and new content monthly would be more in line with a more active live service game, but we'll have to wait and see if that's kind of the timeline that Gearbox is committed to. And even if they are, it might be all for naught if those smaller content drops, even though they're coming out more regularly, are rejected by the fan base. For example, the boss in Coiled Captors has 4 forms, but they are locked by a weekly time gate. So each week you're meant to go back in, run the dungeon, and beat the harder form for better loot. While an interesting idea, right now it seems like most players are kind of just frustrated that they don't have access to the full DLC right away, especially considering it's on the smaller side. For those that have already bought the entire season pass, it looks like some of the better stuff, like a new character class, aren't coming until part 4 drops, which, of course, doesn't have a release date yet, but I guess at least there's that to look forward to. And just to add, I think the issues with Tiny Tina's Wonderland's first DLC pack here is part of a larger and growing sentiment among players who are feeling like, game developers and game publishers are expecting players to pay more for less, or, maybe even the same content that they might have paid for before. So hopefully with the next 3 DLC drops, Gearbox can kind of prove that the season pass they're building is worth that $30 to $40 price point. All right, that's gonna do it for today. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know in the comments if you're playing Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, or, if you've just been burned by DLC or, a season pass for one of your favorite games in the past. Again, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video right here on Inside Gaming.